Hey everyone, Rascal here.
And Mama, welcome to our podcast.
Today we're covering the third film in the Sam Rami Spider-Man trilogy. Finally!
Yes, Sylveon!
Yes!
Now this one is definitely the darkest out of the trilogy. We should say the Tobey Maguire trilogy.
Yes.
As Venom is introduced along with Harry Osborn becoming the Green Goblin, and the Sandman all attacking both Peter and Spidey. Now, it has made for one of the most intense Spider-Man movies, and also one of the least liked of this series.
True. And before we start, be sure to like, subscribe, and notification bell to get us a future podcast and one of Paws videos.
Absolutely. You finally got to see it.
Yes, it took a little while, but we finally watched it.
I watched it for the second time.
Right.
And as I did mention, it is for some people it's the least liked. For me, yes, this was my least liked. I did not care for this one much at all. I was happy that Tobey Maguire returned, but as far as the movie itself,
Yeah, and one thing I seem to notice with these Spider-Man films is that whenever they get really, really too dark, they tend to not do well. Though that probably will change now because a lot more people like darker storylines more than humorous, so maybe it'll work out better now, but it's just like with some of the Andrew Garfield stuff, it didn't really appeal to many people because it was so veering off kind of far away from Spider-Man. But I guess they wanted to show like this is like almost like everything coming together, like what if Spider-Man sort of lost himself, gave into his anger or the worst parts of himself, and how that affect the people around him.
Yeah, and I do understand that. I think probably for me, it was the Venom part. And I know the story was he was losing himself, he was becoming something different or someone different. But for me, it was too different. And I think for me, the surprise or the thing that I thought was uncharacteristic of the character is how he just went into it and he willingly kept putting it on and he willingly kept just going deeper and deeper. For me, based on the first two movies and based on the character himself, it was just unbelievable that Peter would willingly do this and go to the dark side just to be more popular, just not to wear glasses, just to be a ladies' man, just to act a fool. It just didn't seem like it would be characteristic of him.
Right, that's true, and that's definitely understandable. And along that, you have three villains in here now, and each have a different purpose. Venom ended up being the one, I guess, was his true enemy was himself, I guess, for that instance.
Venom's the only one who was able to get spin-offs later.
Right? And then you had Harry coming back and having his own thing where he didn't even remember Peter at one point when they had the fight. He became like a Green Goblin Jr. And then you had the Sam who had his own arc, and you weren't sure if he was like the hero, a villain or an anti-villain, anti-hero or something because of his backstory. So they tried to have a lot more complex little storylines going on, which is great, but it seemed like they kind of started getting a little too much into one particular section, starting not to be as enjoyable because it's always everything went wrong all the time. Unless you like that type of movie, it's not working.
And especially with Harry, him losing his friend, his best friend. And it was like father, like son, like they were saying, well, there was no other way he could have turned out because this is who his daddy was. And this is how he acted. And it was like, that's not a good message. You've got this Peter message that's positive, and we always have a choice. We can always choose to do the right thing. And then you have the best friend choosing to do the wrong thing, like the father chose to do the wrong thing.
Right.
At least the father's was a split personality and mental illness. But for Harry, it was like, oh, you killed my father. I'm going to kill you. And it was a choice that was a conscious choice. And
it started being like really questioning what was the point of that. And then the only real main villain that they had was Sandman.
Yeah.
And he starts out a little bit sympathetic, but then as it goes on, he starts not being so much like that anymore. And a lot of their storylines aren't rectified until it gets to the Tom Holland film, surprisingly. So this kind of is very perfect timing, seeing how this starts, and then you kind of see a conclusion of that years later.
Right, and I do agree. He was the one true villain, the one new villain.
Right.
Well, Venom was new too, but he was the one true villain where there's a backstory that's happened. society did this, and
Reliving
he had
the
this
society.
reaction, and he became a villain because of this. And like you said, at first you were like, oh, well, he doesn't really want to be a bad guy. But then later on, you're like, oh, yeah, he really does. But he was on when you could see when he started from point A getting to point Z, and why Peter had to fight him.
Right.
Venom was a parasite, an alien parasite. And again, him knowing this and the lab work and everything and willingly putting it on and doing it just didn't fit for me. And Harry, again, didn't fit for me because he's the best friend and he follows the dad in becoming a villain, and that just was not interesting.
Yeah.
And it took, not only did it take out Harry, but it took out James Franco. And that was disappointing as well.
Yeah, and they did the same thing when they did the Amazing Spider-Man. All of a sudden, last 5 minutes, oh, Harry is the villain. I bet you didn't see that coming, even though he looked evil all the way through, and then he looks like a zombie at the end. You're like, what is going on? Why do you keep trying to make Harry the bad guy? It's not working.
Well, they rectified a little in the last Spider-Man series we saw with Robbie Damon.
Yeah.
And they didn't go that route, so I was really happy.
Right. And here, this is also where a lot of these Spider-Man memes were born. And it's the one, they call him when he goes to the slightly Venom side, and he's like the cool guy, I guess. And they call him Bully McGuire instead of Tobey Maguire. And he's been memed so much. He does weird little dance. He thinks he's cool, and he does that a thing. And it's like, what are you doing? And like you said, he's suddenly cool, and he just says what's on his mind, and he's
no hurry.
He's a what? What? No, stop! No! What? Stop!
Okay, I'm sorry. But yes, it was their version of cool.
That's true. But the point is, it really set the... That's what launched all those memes. And it's kind of funny now seeing it. It's like, wait, no wonder they meme this, because seeing maybe then it was a little weird, but now it's just ridiculously funny. It's just like, you think this is cool, you think you bad or something, and he just acts like a jerk the rest of the time until he gets rid of Venom. But you kind of got what they were addressing. It wasn't as dark as Spectacular Spider-Man, but still the same message was across.
Now, all that being said, it was still a great movie.
Right.
It was still a great movie.
Right.
1, 2, and 3 are all great movies.
Right.
And they did not drop the ball. They didn't lower the quality of the movie. They didn't, go cheap. And that is what still makes it, despite the things that I really don't care for, and despite our thinking it's a little too dark, it's still a good movie.
Right.
And that rarely happens, where you have a movie that's not really as well liked, but it still is a quality film.
Yeah.
And Spider-Man 3 is in that small group.
Right. And I think one last thing to mention besides Sandman playing a role in what happened with Uncle Ben, that's actually was another interesting part of it, is that they had Mary Jane in here, and I think she acted a little different in here than she did the previous 2 movies. And they're together now, they're engaged and everything, and yeah, it's gonna be a little different, but she acted a little bit out of character. She acted a little more like demanding in here for no reason, and they of course have to have the same old trope of, they got split apart because we don't know how to write people being happy together, so once they're together, 10 minutes later we'll break them up because they can't stand each other suddenly. So I kind of didn't like that and went that route, especially waited 3 movies for it to happen, and all of a sudden, they're not right for each other, even though we said they were in like 2 movies ago.
Right.
So that would be like the only bigger nitpick out of it, and it's something that you kind of weren't expecting at the time it was out, and kind of didn't care for that was more of the conflict than the supervillain fight until it got towards later in the film.
But again, this is a quality film, a great trilogy, and we get to see the return of Tobey Maguire as his version of Spider-Man in Spider-Man No Way Home.
Yes.
Excellent, and really happy to see him back. And from what we understand now, there's going to be a Spider-Man 4, so they get to finish the movie out, the franchise out, and he gets another movie, which really makes me happy.
Right.
Because before Tom Holland, Tobey Maguire was my favorite Spider-Man.
Right.
And so now I have Tobey Maguire, and I have Tom Holland. And with the new movie, now I've also come to appreciate Andrew Garfield. So it's just really great. So if you've seen Spider-Man 3, and we know you have, let us know what you think in the comments below. Do you love it? Do you hate it? What do you think of Venom, Sandman, Goblin 2, as you call him, or Goblin Jr.? And if you haven't seen it, where have you been? You gotta see it before you watch Spider-Man No Way Home. Of course, unless you've already seen it, then boo-hoo for you.
Right. And if you haven't already, subscribe for updates and weekly videos on your favorite anime series, anime shows, and all things animation.
And we can't wait, Sylvia, to hear what you have to say about this, because we know how much you love Sam Raimi.
Yes. So, thank you so much for watching Rascal Entertainment.
And I'm Mom Entertainment.
Have a toontastic day.
Peace.